But right now, I'd like to call the next panel out as we discuss reliable sources and rethinking college rankings. So the first panelist will be Alexander McCormick, who is the director of the National Survey on Student Engagement. This is a position he has held for the last 7 years. He also holds a faculty appointment in the Indiana University School of Education's Educational Leadership and Policy Studies Department, where he teaches in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program. Alex aims to enrich the national discourse about quality and accountability in higher education, while also providing institutions with tools they can use to diagnose and improve undergraduate teaching and learning. He began his career in higher education as an admissions officer at Dartmouth College, where he subsequently served as the assistant dean of the college. He's joined with Bruce Hammond, who is the co-author of 4 volumes of the FIS Guide series, the FIS Guide to Getting into the Right College, Real College Essays That Work, Countdown to College, and Nailing the New SAT. He was previously managing editor of the FIS Guide to Colleges and is the author of Discounts and Deals at the nation's 360 best colleges. As an undergraduate at Yale University, he was editor-in-chief of the Insider's Guide to Colleges. And I'll say I had actually remembered buying that when I was an undergraduate at Stanford and deriving great mirth from the stylistic and idiosyncratic way in which it was written. So I was greatly disappointed to see that they shut that publication down this year. But after his career in college counseling in the U.S., independent private schools, he recently transitioned to overseas work and is now the assistant to the principal for international affairs and vice principal of the international division of Tsinghua University High School in Beijing, China. Crockett Marr is an advocate for the liberal arts and sciences, as well as for equity and access to higher education. He is the senior assistant dean of admission at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and in his current role, he oversees Reed's communications and recruitment efforts for New York, the Northeast region, and Asia. He has extensive experience in college admissions, having conducted more than 1,400 admission interviews and having read more than 10,000 admission essays. Additionally, Marr has worked with colleges that change lives, furthering his commitment to advancing colleges that are committed to student-centered search processes. Marr is a member of the National Association for College Admission Counseling and the Overseas Association for College Admission Counseling. He earned a BA in Classics from Reed College and is the author of Egypt, Pythagoras, Plato, a thesis on the African origins of the Western intellectual tradition. And finally, we have Jordan Goldman, author of The Student's Guide to Colleges, a series of college guidebooks from Penguin Books. He's also the founder of Unigo, a website matching students with colleges, scholarships, internships, student loans, majors, and careers. Unigo receives more than 15 million unique viewers each year and has provided college reviews to U.S. News and World Report. And then I pause there in case anybody wants to boo. Powered college rankings for Money Magazine, partnered with the Wall Street Journal on its college education coverage, launched college guides with USA Today, and created a national college readiness curriculum with McGraw-Hill. Jordan has published education policy papers with the McGraw-Hill Research Foundation and has been an education expert on ABC News, Fox News, NBC News, the Cable News Network, and MSNBC. Inc. magazine named him one of the top 30 young entrepreneurs in America. And I will be moderating this panel. But the first question that I really want to put to people is, why rankings at all? Why are things getting ranked? And what should we make of them? I mean, people are always saying, you know, what's the best college? And so obviously the best college isn't a kind in nature. What is it that people really have in mind? What is the question that people should be asking?
I mean, I think one answer to that is there are just so many schools, and everyone's trying to figure out which school is right for them, and they're looking for an ordered way to structure all of this information. And one thing that's helpful is a lot of these rankings are just an attempt to put schools in an order that's easily understood, and that can help you narrow this down and find the right school for you. Something that gets lost there, though, is every rankings has its own methodology. So understanding what each rankings holds to be important and unimportant, and finding a ranking and a methodology that aligns with what's important to you. Because if you look at a ranking and it says, hey, the school's #1, but you don't agree with what's behind that, what's being weighted and what's being disregarded, then that's not the right ranking for you to pay attention to. It's really important to figure out what qualities are important to you in a school, to recognize that a lot of these rankings are just an attempt to organize those qualities. Oh, no? Sorry about that if anyone couldn't hear me. But yeah, it's an attempt to narrow things down to find a good fit.
There are some arenas where rankings are valid. For example, Division I NCAA sports. But even these rankings have their limits, right? The NCAA Division I football program recently moved to actually have a playoff so that they could, at the end of the season, determine who was the #1 football team. I think when you're talking about rankings for a quality of education, you're much, much, much less likely to derive a meaningful value from that ranking as you consider the educational program that you seek and ask the question, where are you going to flourish? I really think rankings can quickly lose most, if not all, meaning.
Mm-hmm. The biggest market for the most common rankings, the most popular ones that I'm sure everyone can think of, is alumni, because people are competitive and they want to feel like they're going to the #1 school or the #12 school, or last year we were 24 and this year we're 22, so we're on the move. So yeah, it's fun. You know, it's not quite like big time sports, but it's fun to see your school in the rankings, right?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of reasons why the rankings have emerged. One is, high school seniors and their parents who are trying to make decisions about where to apply to college confront a huge problem of simultaneously information overload and information deficit, right? So there's so many colleges and universities out there. How do you sort of systematically go at figuring out which one might be the right ones for me? But the information deficit is that the colleges and universities themselves are not necessarily giving you the information you need. They produce nice glossy view books and so on that will show students sitting on the grass, a small group of students sitting on the grass around a professor and students having fun doing all kinds of different things. But I think you know that those are marketing materials. And so there is a market, a need for seemingly objective information to sort of help you sort this out. The other big reason why the rankings exist is because, remember, these are commercial publications, right? They're responding to a market. And the market has a real thirst, a hunger for stories of winners and losers, right? So winners and losers sell. So something called America's Best Colleges is immediately going to hit a big market niche. I think one thing to really be cautious about with the rankings is sort of, as the very first comment suggested, ranking according to what, right? What are the factors? And the dominant ranking in the marketplace right now is heavily influenced by reputation and average SAT scores and so on. Partly because it was engineered to reproduce the conventional wisdom. So we've got to be sure that the Ivies end up on top and so on. But that's true. It was literally engineered to sort of, so that it wouldn't have no validity at all. So people would essentially buy into it. But I think one of the most dangerous things about rankings is the false precision. The idea that, there's this kind of numerically ordered that you can actually array colleges and universities along the same way that you can their football team on their one-loss record. Because it leads to a false impression that if I go to the school ranked number 25, I'm going to have a qualitatively better experience than if I went to number 26 or 27 or 28. And just about so, I study colleges and universities and college students. Just about all the research says that measures of quality of the experience and outcome measures vary a lot more between students within any given institution than between institutions. So you should be very skeptical about sort of what those fine differences mean between 25,
Yeah.
30.
I mean, I think to that point, once you declare a major, more than 50% of your classes are going to be in your major. So that's really going to shape the experience you have at a school. So how do you rank a school number 1 or number 2 when the experience of being in the major in that school is so key to the experience, and the experience between majors, the same school might have a major where the department is 20 students and another major where the department is 500 students. So I think it really becomes important to figure out what's important to you, what do you consider meaningful, how do you learn the best, what environment, and then figure out a college that matches that. Or to the extent you are going to look at rankings, find a ranking set whose methodology is aligned with what you think is important. And just use it as a very vague guide, not as a definitive cultural institution that's really saying something meaningful in itself. Because you realize as you go later down the line, it doesn't matter. And the rankings also shift from year to year. So students who get really excited, I'm going to the school that's ranked number 5. 20 years from now, that ranking, because it's so arbitrary, they might have changed one piece of their methodology, and now it's ranked number 30, or now it's ranked 60. You have no real control over it. So don't get too hung up on the reputation of a school tied to the ranking, because that's constantly changing.
And Alex, I wanted to add to the problem you've introduced of false precision in rankings. We're focusing on only one party in the college search here. We're talking about colleges representing themselves or how they're represented in the landscape. We're not yet talking about you, the students, right, as potential candidates for these institutions. And the idea that fit is critically important, right? The idea that some students may be much, much, much better suited to choose a college that is farther down in the rankings because of particular aspects of that academic program.
Yeah, so what I would say is really what are the questions that people should be asking when they're looking for colleges, when they're doing their college search? And once they have formulated their questions, where can they go to find information that they can trust, not the information that the college's marketing department is cooking up to make this college seem like the perfect fit for the student, but really something that they can trust?
I want to start by saying the college search represents a complex interaction, right? Colleges representing themselves, hopefully authentically, accurately, and well, and students representing themselves authentically, accurately, and well. And when this works out, we have a sort of optimized matching where students can detect the best college for them, and colleges can admit students based on their best fit for that institution. And looking again at the student's role here, I really want to point, Ray, to introspection as where students need to begin. Really asking themselves, where are they going to flourish? Because it may be at a large state institution, it may be at a local or a regional college, it may be at one of the elite, highly selective institutions.
I think, too, getting rid of this needle in the haystack notion that there's this one perfect place out there and there are 3,000 of them, so the pressure's on. I'm going to have to find that one. You know, it's the analogy I make as a school counselor, and maybe it's not a good one, but boyfriend and girlfriend, you know? You're not going to go, if you're a girl, you're not going to go interview every possible guy that you could possibly have a date with, you know, be on the internet, drive yourself crazy. You meet some, you put yourself out there, you meet some that you like, and you pick one. And figuring out how to do that, you can make a bad choice. I'm not saying you can't make a bad choice. You can make a terrible choice. But you can also make a lot of good choices. And the idea that there's this one that you're going to find is just inaccurate. So take that pressure off yourself.
Well, and presumably, too, staying on your metaphor, It's not a question of asking your parents where you should go or asking your friends where you should go, because they generally set you up with the wrong people.
Exactly.
And I mean, we take a technology approach where, so unigo.com, it's a free website. We have more than 700,000 college reviews. So you tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll match you with schools where we think you might be a good fit. And then you can see current students' reviews of all these different schools. And you can search within the reviews by different factors. So you can say, only show me reviews written by female students or African-American students or English majors. So you can see each school from the eyes of someone who's just like you, which is ultimately what's important. It is a current student who kind of looks like a version of yourself 1 or 2 or 3 years down the line. Are they happy at that school? And there's lots of different mechanisms with the internet, with Facebook, to proactively find those people and just ask them, say, hey, like, you remind me of myself. What do you think of this school? And then find someone who's like you at a different school and say, what do you think of that school? It's really all about personal fit.
This actually goes to another weakness of the rankings, is that they tend to focus very heavily on input factors and factors connected with resources that the institution has. And they treat the student experience as a black box, right? They say virtually nothing about the actual student experience. And so one of your best informants as you're visiting colleges and so on is not going to be admissions officers. It's not going to be people like us. It's not going to be the glossy materials. It's going to be other students. So a lot of institutions have hosting programs where you can spend a night in the residence halls. You can go to classes and so on. You should go to the union, go to the dining halls, talk to students, find out as much as you can about what the student experience actually is like. And I can't not make a pitch for the kinds of things that we ask about in my project. So I run this project called the National Survey of Student Engagement, and we're trying to change this discourse about college quality by asking current college students about their experience, and particularly about activities and behaviors that previous research shows to be positively related to learning and student development. So Ray asks, what kinds of questions should you be asking? And some of you might have seen out at the table, there's some little flyers saying, a pocket guide to choosing college, asking the right questions, or questions to ask on your college visits. And this comes from my project, and it does suggest to you the kinds of questions that you should, in fact, be asking when you visit. And I'll say one other thing. So we analyze our data, of course, and we look at the relationship between some of our measures of the quality of the student experience and things like selectivity. And I think the conventional wisdom would have you think that there's kind of a stair-step relationship between, I'll do it in the direction that would make sense for you. As you go up the selectivity scale, then measures of the quality of the experience would get higher. That's the conventional wisdom. We did an analysis last year, and we found almost no differences according to selectivity around a couple of measures of experiences with faculty. So we have some measures of student-faculty interaction, measures of effective teaching practices, like faculty members using examples when explaining difficult points, providing prompt and useful feedback, and so on. Virtually no association at all with selectivity. And that's, I think, a really important corollary to Bruce's point about, there isn't the one best school that you have to find, is going to a highly ranked institution in no way assures you, guarantees that you're going to have the best educational experience. And going to a less highly ranked doesn't mean you're going to get a second-rate education. Doesn't mean they're all good either. There's variability within each one of these selectivity tiers.
I think 2 questions that are relatively new that you could ask. One is the world has changed really quickly in the past 5 or 10 years. Ask schools how they're using technology on campus, and not just like how many computer labs do you have, but how are they in a really fundamental way integrating changes in technology and changes in learning into their curriculum and into the everyday lives of their students. Same thing, like you can now learn online in ways that you couldn't 10 years ago. So one of the values of a college is its alumni network in addition to the traditional teaching. How is the school actualizing the value of their alumni network? Like how are they using technology? Ask them to show you Like, how would a current student or a recent graduate network with an alumni? How is that value transfer happening? Because that's really a lifelong benefit of a school that a lot of them give lip service to, but they don't necessarily deliver on. And I think more people should ask schools about that and really kind of hold them to that. And just for yourself, that's, once you leave, you recognize a valuable alumni network can do a lot for you. So make sure the schools you're looking at have that, and that should really be something that you weigh.
Ray, and again, going back to your question of what are these reliable sources, who should prospective students reach out to? I think you all as prospective students should take heart. You are in an incredibly rich information environment right now, and we're able to either share different aspects of our educational program as a college or as interpreters of the college experience. We're in a sort of disclosure environment that is incredibly rich right now. I think the challenge is to find out sources of information that you can trust, and then to sort of use these to inform your decision.
And just one last quick thing. On that note, on the one hand, you want to be respectful to these schools, but on the other hand, you want to be a little bit of a vicious consumer. This is a very expensive product, and don't hold back from, if you were going to buy any other expensive product, what are the really cutting questions that you'd want answered, and find a mechanism to get those questions answered. It doesn't always have to be like you calling the school directly and associating that question with your name and your face, but there are ways to get the answer. Like, don't be too timid in this process. You're being sold something, and you want to know what it is you're being sold.
And that advice has actually come out a few times in the panels so far today, the idea of looking behind the admission tour or talking to current students that you know at that institution. I encourage you all to, yes, do exactly that type of research. And as Jordan's suggesting, ask the hard, cutting questions of us as institutions and, and what we offer.
One of the things about rankings that's often struck me is sort of in the name of being objective, they try to be as quantitative as possible. So they have these elaborate formulas weighing in every measurable factor. And there are times where it feels like the old joke of people looking for the lost contact lens under the street light, because that's where the light is good, and not off in the darkness where they actually lost it. And it would seem that an important part of the college experience is the happiness of the students. To what degree are they happy? To what degree are they finding meaning in being in this institution? And to what degree is this institution nurturing them as persons, leading to their development? And then is this something that lives on after they've left the school? Because I'm sure that one can find schools that are high on the party school of the year list, where the students seem to be perfectly happy while they're there, but when they look back on college, there's nothing except debt that they're looking back upon, as opposed to places where students are happy when they're there and really for the rest of their lives, they have this new view of the world. I think, colleges that change lives, which
Indeed.
You remember. Talk about that and talk about these sorts of qualitative factors.
Well, I think really quickly we're moving away from the tyranny of rankings to, I hope we're moving away from the tyranny of rankings to the tyranny of ROI. And the college scorecard resource that was recently released spurred a series of articles that then sort of re-ranked colleges based on 10-year or mid-career salaries, right? And this goes back to your question, Ray, of to what extent should I evaluate my college choice based on the salary that I'll obtain at some stage in my career? At a place like Reed, we are proposing questions that are much different and I hope much more profound, while at the same time not dismissing the notion that you need to consider the college of choice as an investment, and you need to consider and scrutinize the sort of financial aid opportunities and so forth that the college offers.
So I think what we're all saying, perhaps in different ways, is that relying on rankings is another way of saying, I'm going to let someone else decide because I have no ideas of my own. And try telling a college on the Why Us essay that, well, you're ranked number 12, so that's why I'm applying. It's a relative process. And so figuring out your criteria, I just throw this out as a process. brainstorm, look inside yourself, and figure out 4 or 5 things that you're looking for, and then look relatively. Because it's never in isolation. It's always in comparison with others. So when you do your college visits, this is a time where maybe being a little organized, or do your reading, you're on Unigo, you're on whatever, you're looking for these things that you've identified. And that really will help you not only find the right place for you, but it will also help you be able to talk about why you've identified the match, as we were talking about earlier in the program, which in turn will help you be admitted. Because if you understand yourself really well, and you're not just following blindly some oracle somewhere, it has a way of coming out on your application. And if you can make the match to the places that you're looking at and do it on your application, you find the right place, and by the way, you help yourself get in.
Yeah, I would think one of the things too, I mean, we've talked about you're doing your school visits, you're in a class, you're watching what happens. I mean, it's easy to go to a class and see a professor who's the most exciting professor in the world, and you think, yes, if only I could go to this school and see these lectures. Odds are you can go on YouTube and see these lectures. It's a question of what are the students like in there? If this professor is up there telling some exciting story and the students are half asleep or not engaged, what's going on there? Or if something seems dry but the students are really riveted. When you're there one day watching one class, you need to get a sense of the broader narrative and how this fits in. And similarly, look at how the students are living. If there are some universities where the students go to great lengths to make it look like they're never doing any work, and then when they're away from when they're out of sight, they're working themselves ragged, staying up late, because the culture is one of a seeming relative ease. There are other places where students look like they're working really hard, but they never seem to get anything done. I mean, part of it is figuring out who you are and which of the schools seem to be the kind of place where people like you are thriving. I think that these are the kinds of things that people would do well to get their hands on. And it's a question of, how do you really sort of, again, when you're getting these very narrow snippets or looking at these sources, I mean, how can you really get into answering these sorts of questions?
I mean, that's one of the benefits of the web. So like on Unigo, we tell people, don't just write written reviews of your school, but students are constantly uploading photos of their school, videos of their school, and not just campus tours, but just videos of themselves hanging out in the dorms or them at a campus party. Our goal is to really show we have great technology and people are sharing content and creating content all the time. We want to show on our site all the different facets of a school from a student's point of view, because that's ultimately the experience that you're going to be stepping into.
Yeah, I think another thing that's worth thinking about is, 4 years is going to go by really, really fast. And happiness is important, but a lot of times that's the main metric that we have is kind of measures of satisfaction, which is okay. But we really do want to think about colleges as transformative experiences, as college as a transformative experience. So I would really encourage all of you to actually spend a little bit of time thinking hard about how do I want to be different when I graduate from this school? In other words, what do I want to be able to say I took away from that experience? And I hope it's going to be more than just having a lot of fun with my friends. It's great to have that too. But do think about sort of how are you going to be changed, and start thinking about, well, what kinds of information do I need to sort of figure out how I'm going to be able to see that happens. And that pulls me to another point out of our work. Remember I said that sort of most of the variability in the quality of the student experience is not between schools, but it's actually among students. So if this were one classroom, a lot of that quality of experience would vary from you to you to you to you to you. Students do not experience the quality of an institution in identical ways. So a corollary of that, or an implication of that, is in fact that a lot of it is up to you.
Yeah.
It's up to you to find out what are the unique opportunities and experiences that an institution is going to offer you, and how are you going to take advantage of those opportunities. If you approach it as sort of a passive process where I'm going to enroll and find out what classes I have to take and go to the classes, do my homework, take the exams, you're not going to derive maximum benefit out of college, wherever you go. And I think that's the other kind of corollary to Bruce's point about the needle in the haystack as the wrong metaphor. College admissions officers, and I used to be one, part of their job is to make you believe that that is the best place for you, right? And you'll get that unique experience there that you couldn't get anywhere else. And there are elements of uniqueness, of course. Campuses aren't all the same. But they're a lot more similar than different. And the fact is, wherever you end up, if you're going to sort of take responsibility for your education and take advantage of the opportunities there, that's what's going to make the difference in having it be sort of worthwhile for you. So a lot of it's on the student.
And I think one side note of one of the things I was saying earlier, which is don't be shy, and the fact that a lot of your classes are ultimately going to be in the department of your major. Even if you're undecided, if you have some sweep of majors that you think you might be interested in, when you go to a campus, see if you can speak to someone from that major's department. See if while you're on campus, or if you can call that department and ask that major about its size, its level of funding, how many professors it has, what do graduates from that major tend to go on to do. I do think kind of a broad swath of what students from the school make isn't very helpful, but you can say, like, what's an average salary range of students who come out of this major? What are the things they tend to do with their life? Don't be shy. And I think also having a point of view on what's the future of work, like where is the world heading, and what are the skills that that major teaches? What are the jobs 10, 20, 30 years from now that are going to be connected to that? And you can ask that major department, like, what's your point of view? What do you think this major is preparing? What jobs today is it preparing students for? And what's your long-term view of how the world of work is changing and this major is going to change with it? All of that stuff is just going to make you a more informed consumer. And this is, to some degree, an investment of dollars and time. And you want to make sure that investment is put in a way that's going to pay off for you. And what that means is going to be different for everyone, but still keeping that in mind.
And Alex's advice is very much to the point there. The idea that you, as a student or as a consumer, I'm going to conflate those terms. That's true. The active quality that you bring to your education has a significant determining factor on the success that you're going to find there, right? And again, going back to your question, Ray, the idea of, you mentioned colleges that change lives. This is a book written by Lauren Pope, the New York Times education editor for on the order of 30 years, and he wanted to reframe the national dialogue away from the sort of college admission mania 30 years ago. And he sort of reframed this notion of a student-centered college admission search. And I think Lauren and Alex are saying the same thing, that you, by resting the mantle of this search and undertaking a real active student-centered search yourself, are really setting up yourself for success, not just in the search, but in college and even going forward.
Yeah. Well said. Let's see if we have any questions coming in.
So there's been one or two requests for please specifically name some ranking guides, the idea being the ones that perhaps speak to these nuances that you all have addressed, given that there are still rankings. What are the ones that have those, the panoply of reliable sources in them?
Yeah, well, let's see. So with Unigo, do you have ways of getting ranked orderings of things?
So we have some student-generated rankings on Unigo that are totally, we'll ask students, like, where are you the happiest, or where are, like, what are different elements of the social life like, and we'll have students on all different campuses voting, and then we'll order schools. But we do make sure to say, this is just one mechanism of narrowing down colleges. Money Magazine put out a great ranking this year that has a very specific methodology. Forbes magazine put out a ranking with a really specific methodology, US News. I think one of the things we're seeing is traditionally that rankings landscape was dominated by US News, which meant their take on the world was seen as the definitive take on the world, and their factors were the factors. And now you have lots of actors, lots of publications saying, you know what, we think this is important, and we're going to order our list according to that. So it would be helpful, I think, for everyone to do a quick search of like college rankings 2015. You're going to find those big rankings really quickly. Go straight to their methodologies and figure out what's everyone's take and whose take is most aligned with yours.
And Bruce, well, let me put it to Bruce, in the FISC guides, what have you done with rankings? I know that in sort of reading your introduction, there were a number of things that made it sound like, you know, here's a list of good choices of this kind, here's a list of good choices of that kind. So you must be doing some ordering.
Yeah, mainly in our supplemental publications, just trying to provide lists. Also in the big FISC guide, listing some of the majors that schools are known for. I think whether you're looking at college guides or you're looking at rankings, if you can get a list of good programs, ignore the numerical ranking and use that as one person or one entity's idea of a good list. And you can find some of those lists in the FISC guides, mainly in the Right College Guide. That's one of that line of books. So you can find those lists other places, and you know, as long as you're not again using the false precision of a numerical ranking. I think with U.S. News, which we've been bashing a little bit. If you're listening, some of the rankings that you might not have thought of, some of the regional rankings, those are ways that you can take a look at some schools you might not have thought of and find some good, solid institutions. So as long as you use those rankings to expand your list, but I'd get concerned if you knock somebody off just because they're numbered 20 versus number 10, or maybe somehow they're not on this list that some person created, because it's very subjective and it depends on your criteria.
Yeah. And so, Crockett, for colleges that change lives, so the book came out close to 30 years ago. The organization continues to exist under that name. Is this a thing that enshrines the schools that were there 30 years ago continue to be there, or is there a sort of evolving list of people who are ascribing to a kind of vision for what the process should be or what the school's mission should be? Or
well, Colleges That Change Lives as an organization is about 40 colleges that are a loose consortium that collaborates and works together to try and sort of establish our colleges and institutions on a either regional or national landscape. I think that the definition could be much more expansive than that. There are, I mean, many, many institutions that could participate. It just happens to be a list of schools that Lauren Pope at the time felt like were institutions that needed to get more press.
And Alex, so for National Survey of Student Engagement, can I go to your website and get rank orderings and find out who's the most engaging school?
That's the problem here, is we're trying to change this discourse about college quality, but at the same time, you can't come to our website and look up who's tops in student engagement. And I'll tell you I'll tell you why. But that absolutely is a problem. It's one reason why we have this pocket guide to sort of say, well, bring these questions and ask your campuses. So the problem is our information is based on a survey of students, right? We survey first-year students and seniors, ask them a lot of behavioral questions. How much do you ask questions in class and participate in course discussions? How much do you work on projects with other students? How often do you have discussions with people who are different from you with regard to race, ethnicity, economic background, political beliefs, and so on? These are all things that research says correspond to positive outcomes in terms of learning. But the reason we can't publish a rank-ordered list, other than the fact that, as I said in the beginning, the whole idea of numerical rankings as itself is inherently flawed, is, now, looks like a lot of this audience are students. Let's just see, how many of you here are current students? All right, looks like maybe a quarter of the population here. So when you're college students and our survey comes around, and if our survey were, in fact, used to rank colleges and universities. It wouldn't take long for students to clue in to how they fill out this survey is going to determine, at least in part, the value of their degree. And then it's just game over.
Yeah.
Right? We have to be able to trust what students are telling us. So our information is primarily diagnostic for the participating schools. We feed back to those schools how their students responded to the survey relative to responses at comparison group institutions. We let the schools identify who their peer institutions are that they want to compare to. And so our emphasis is much more about giving schools tools they can use to improve the quality of education. So yeah, that's the disappointing part of our work, is that we don't make it easy. But back to the question, I agree with the panelists, and I'm going to disappoint the questioner, because I think the idea of ranking itself is just inherently too flawed to be useful. I think a better approach might be to identify some really broad criteria that you're interested in. And there are some online search services. Unigo probably does this. The College Board has a great college search service that allows you to specify things like, well, do I want to be in a rural situation, an urban situation? Do I want to go to a big school, a small school? Lots of sort of course characteristics. Identify what fields you might be interested in. Generate a couple of lists, and then from there, look at several rankings and try to get a more nuanced picture of these schools that you might start with a pretty big list, and you might start to narrow it down, not based on any one source, because any one source, like Jordan said, is going to be heavily influenced by the criteria that they bring to it. You want to make these choices based on your criteria, not somebody else's criteria.
Yeah, to get practical with this, to me, one of the big things, as we say, identify your criteria, is to understand whether you're going to be in a major-driven search, that is to say, driven by the subject matter you want to study, or whether you're more in the undecided, which means arts and sciences or liberal arts, or whatever name that you hang on that. To a large extent, it correlates to whether you're looking at pre-professional training for undergraduate school. We could have a whole panel talking about the pluses and minuses of pre-professional education versus arts and sciences, liberal arts education. If you are wanting to major in aerospace engineering, for instance, then you're going to be choosing from among institutions that have strong programs in that particular pre-professional area. That applies to engineering. The institutions divide themselves up into colleges and schools, and you need to decide whether you're going to be in the College of Engineering or the College of Business or the College of Arts and Sciences. That, in turn, will dictate your applicant pool that you're in. It will dictate what you study. It'll dictate a huge number of things. So clearly, if you're on that train of thought, then you're going in one fork in the road. But if you're more generally interested in lots of things, you have diverse interests, your parents say, what are you going to major in? Oh my God, don't ask me. If you're in that category, then wonderful. The American education system, higher education, is uniquely suited for you to go and sample the menu of things that you can, and so undecided is a perfectly honorable thing to say if you're in arts and sciences. It's not better than saying you want to be in biology or whatever else you can dream up. But if you want to be an engineer, for instance, then you need to kind of know that you're going to do that. So thinking that through is a big step to me as people begin this search.
Yeah, if you want to be an engineer, you should go to a school that has an engineering program.
I actually want to push back a little bit.
But let me just, one other quick point, which is, there's nothing wrong with not knowing what you're going to major in. And in fact, I haven't looked at the latest statistics, but about a quarter to a third of undergraduates change their major at some point along the way. So I don't want you to feel like, gosh, I got to figure out what I'm going to major in.
I want to push back against both of these comments, and I want to use rankings to do it. So let's see if this works. Bruce, you mentioned that an arts and sciences education was more suited to students who are undecided. or a liberal arts education. And we find at Reed that we have students arriving on our campus, a liberal arts campus, with extraordinarily specialized interests. And in fact, our students go on to earn PhDs in very high percentages. When compared to other colleges and universities, our liberal arts graduates are number two to earn biology PhDs, number 3 to earn chemistry PhDs, and number 4 to earn physics and engineering PhDs, and we don't have an engineering major at Reed. So I want to agree in general, but I want to maybe reinforce what you said later, Bruce, that that undecided is a positive
Sure,
thing, right? The idea that that college, and particularly the United States college system, should be open-ended and expansive, and that is a critical phase of your education. As you undertake your education at a place like Reed, you're going to have 2 full years to do real significant work in multiple fields before you accelerate and choose that singular focus.
I would say point well taken, and I could have left it at,
Yeah.
do you want to major in a pre-professional
Indeed,
area?
right.
And then you have that fork in the road.
Another question.
Okay, so this actually is touching on some questions that have been coming in throughout the day. So talking about rankings, we've been talking about academics and ROI, but trying to pull back a little to less number-based rankings. Let's say more for a student to feel accepted or welcome socially or demographically. So for instance, somebody has written in saying they haven't heard much about resources for students of color to approach, we were talking about the brochures before, and one of the people talking was saying there were people of every color in the picture, but yet this person was saying, I don't know that the resources that are available or the assumptions that are being made about me as a student of color are the same. So is there any kind of ranking that's more holistic that people can look for, rather than just the number-based?
I mean, that's one of the things they were saying earlier, that like on Unigo, you can actually search for perspectives at different schools by an African-American student or a female student to find what students who are like you are saying. I'd also encourage everyone in the vein of being aggressive. Everyone's really comfortable going on sites like Facebook. You can search on Facebook to find people who are at a college, who are of a particular ethnicity. Message strangers. Like, this is ultimately going to be a 4-year, multiple $100,000 decision that lasts with you throughout the rest of your life in the form of an alumni network. So you really have to be proactive. If there's an experience or a point of view that is tied to your own, and it's really important to you to find other people with that same experience or point of view and see, is this a good place for people like me? You got to do that. Like, there are ways to do that today. Reach out to people on LinkedIn. A lot of cases, if someone says, I'm thinking about going to your school, you remind me a lot of myself, would you mind answering a question or two? They'll do it. Or you can reach out to the school and say, hey, will you put me in touch with a student who fits these characteristics? Or will you put me in touch with an alum who fits these characteristics? 9 times out of 10, the school will bend over backwards to make that connection. People just don't think to ask.
Yeah. Going back to your point earlier about if colleges were like washing machines, we could use Consumer Reports to determine which was the best washing machine. I think the takeaway for the students in the audience is really we're giving you an assignment much different than flipping to US News or Consumer Reports. We're giving you a multi-year complex project that you're going to take away from this afternoon. And it starts with introspection. It depends on real research that you're going to do, encountering and engaging the many sources or the mentors or the people you trust. It depends on extensive efforts to get on campuses and really either from a distance connect with students or from that visit engage the students and the professors that you get to meet.
I mean, a scary statistic, and there's lots of reasons for this, but about 33% of students transfer. And like some of them are going from a 2-year college to a 4-year college or to a community college to a different school, but some of them are people that just picked out a school in a rankings and went there without really asking themselves the hard questions and then found out that they were really unhappy or they didn't put in the time and the work and the dollar investment up front to make sure they were making the right decision. So I just encourage everyone, like that transfer process is both financially stressful and personally stressful. Really try to put in the time up front to make sure that the school you're looking at is going to be a good fit for you.
But at the same time, transferring is okay.
Yeah,
And
which is
while
fine.
we
I don't mean
do
to
sort
in
of
any way.
we strive for this optimal match at the outset. But in many cases, you're going to make a decision which, for any number of reasons, could choose to be the college where you intend to depart, where you won't most flourish. And then you're going to call the admissions office and then visit other schools and find that next institution, perhaps better informed and make that better.
And your school will even help you transfer. If you
By all
tell them,
means.
I'm not
By all
happy here, I
means.
want to go somewhere else.
Absolutely.
They
Oh,
understand.
absolutely.
Don't be afraid.
So I just wanted to loop back to what Jordan said a minute ago. If you notice the dynamic, if someone gives you the ranking, it makes you passive. Oh, number 5, number
point.
2, number 1. I'm done. What Jordan said was a life skill, networking, reaching out, figuring out what you want. If you just do this, you're going to have a wonderful career, and it won't matter where you go because you know how to get the information that you need to make a good decision, and you're not going to be satisfied with the one-size-fits-all or what everybody else. Why do we like the rankings? Because it allows us to have an answer that we don't have to work for.
Yeah. And so back to the question, again, I'm going to sort of disappoint. It's my specialty, sorry. Which is, rather than thinking, what's the best school in the country for African-American students or for low-income students or for Muslim students, right? I would say that has it backwards. Go the other way, sort of what are the broad characteristics of the kind of institution I can see myself attending and where I might have fun, and then do the campus visits, go to the Muslim Student Center, right? Go to sort of the Black Student Association, talk to folks who are sort of a member of that demographic group that you identify with that you want to find out about, and get some insight, from the person on the ground, not from, a bunch of analysts working for some remote organization, picking certain measures and then making judgments about this is the best place for students of characteristic X.
But I mean, on that note, like I'm always surprised. People will do these campus visits and they spend a lot of money and a lot of time. And they go to a campus and they're there for 2 hours. And they go on the official tour, which you have to acknowledge, even though it's well-intentioned, it's often a marketing package where they're showing you very specific, like you're taken to the car dealership and they're showing you these shiny parts of the car. And then people go, okay, I get to school, and then they move on after they've taken hours to drive there and spent all this money to get there, and they're gone in an hour or two. Like, treat it almost like a detective when you're on that campus. You've already sunk the time to get there and the expense of getting there. So get everything out of that visit that you possibly can. Make a list of, like, a lot of people will know for a car, okay, the car dealer tells me this, but like I'm gonna look under their hood, and I'm gonna look at this, and I'm gonna look at that. It's not any different here. Make a list of things you wanna see and people you wanna talk to, and put in a little bit more time and spend an extra hour or 2 on campus. You're gonna get a lot more out of that.
Right, so the car buying analogy is mostly not right for college, but you wouldn't buy a car without taking it for a test drive, right? And that's what sort of some of the things we're talking about amount to, right? Take it for a test drive, get to know some of the students, go to the student center, go sit in on some classes.
Right. The other thing too is you wouldn't expect, if you're buying any other product or service for a couple $100,000,
Right.
you're not going to assume that they have purely your best interest in heart.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things with universities that students often fail to do is look at fundamentally what is the mission of this institution. You go to a tier 1 research university, they're not there to teach undergraduates. They're there to produce generalizable knowledge. It's useful for them to have undergraduates coming through because it advances part of their broader mission. But you're in some sense more of a necessary evil than a coveted good. Four-year teaching institution, they exist to teach. So it's one of these things. Where do you want to be? Now, if you want to learn how to do research, if your goal is to be trained in the ways of research, then by all means, a research institution is a great place. But if what you really want to do is just sit around and learn and be taught by people who are going to be held accountable for how well they teach you rather than for how much they publish, then think seriously about the institutions you're looking at.
I mean, the most expensive things a lot of people buy are a house, a car, and a school. But most people will go and visit a house they're thinking of buying multiple times. They'll go to the car dealership and look at that car more than once. They'll visit a school once for an hour, and then they decide to go. But cost-wise, this is that class of decision. So really make sure that you put in the research time.
Yeah. I think we have time for one last question.
There are some questions about other countries producing league tables, which I guess is the
Yeah.
way to talk about rankings. Is there anything to learn from watching how other people set up a ranking system and or fulfill it or work against it?
You have to understand that the U.S. is an outlier in higher education. The whole rest of the world does things differently, where, for the most part, where you go to uni or whatever, in the UK, you go to study a particular subject. So those league tables that you're talking about are virtually always about particular majors, particular things that you study. So there is a bit of apples and oranges related to those, but I think it's fair I think we could say that overall the quality of the international rankings we would not find, I dare say, any more useful and probably less useful than the ones domestically. Maybe I should speak for myself.
One difference that goes to sort of some of the points that I've made about domestic rankings is there are some that actually put the selection and weighting of criteria in your hands. So they don't produce one ranking, but they actually have a web-based system. So multi-rank in the European Union is an example of one of these that actually lets you, the user, decide which criteria you want to use, and then it will produce an answer. But they still suffer from the same kind of core problems of choosing. I look at you as if you're the questioner. Sorry. It's like wherever the questioner is. Of distilling sort of a really, really complex experience and multidimensional, multi-attribute problem down to a handful of measures and using those to stand for sort of this much more diffuse conception of quality.
I could see rankings applying better to international colleges and universities than they do to the United States. And going back to your point, Bruce, the US has a very unique educational system in which we intend a multiplicity of different institutions, right? And we place it on you as students or consumers to make an informed decision what of these incredibly diverse institutions offer the education that you seek. Right? So to me, the idea that rankings here might serve us least of all is at the same time a takeaway, but it also goes back to the original condemnation of rankings, the idea that rankings make colleges compete around a set of criteria. They make colleges more similar to each other, fighting for students who have a higher GPA or a higher test score or a higher standard of this or that, when in fact our educational system should be fostering even more diverse, unique institutions to suit the sort of diverse educational programs that our students seek.
Very well said. With that, we're at the 4 o'clock hour, so I will thank the panelists.